All right, here we are. You pushed your button, I've pushed my button. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If you're new, welcome. Everyone else, what's up? How was your week? I don't know about you, but I'm way off of my routine today. And anybody who knows me knows that I have very set rituals and routines that I like to keep to consistently over many, many years, both in my practice and in my daily life rituals as well. And we are flying by the seat of our pants today, my friends, partly because my dear wife had surgery on her wrist yesterday. She had a cyst removed and a ligament repaired, so she is out of commission. She's on some Vicodin on the couch. And I am in full daddy and caretaker mode. I have snuck up here to the attic in this very small window of time just before I get back downstairs to make some dinner for the kids before I head to the studio because I got to teach tonight. And this is all on top of a somewhat traumatic tooth extraction 3 days ago, and my back being still kind of tweaked. But, I don't even have time right now to stop and take it in and feel and have a cry with you. I can't even do that. I got to finish this and I got to go downstairs and make the dinner and then I got to go to the studio. And it's just as well because I don't think we need to do a big check-in right now. I've actually got a couple things I wanted to say to y'all, but I think it'll be better on the other side after we listen to today's conversation with Harish Wallis, a.k.a. Christopher Wallis. And I couldn't be more happy to be bringing this conversation to you today. If you've been here for the last few weeks especially, or even more than just the last few weeks, you've heard me pulling on some threads, and I feel like today we get to tie some of those threads into a few brilliant bows. And I just so appreciated Harish's clarity and his wisdom. I really got a lot of this conversation. I think you're going to get a lot out of it too. And I think my comments will serve better after having had a chance to listen to Harish. I will mention that if you're somebody who really looks forward to these intros and outros with me, and you haven't subscribed to my other podcast, Jay Brown Yoga Thoughts, maybe you guys don't know that I have it. Some of you do. Earlier this year, I started this other podcast called Jay Brown Yoga Thoughts. They are recordings of my blog posts that I've been writing every month for more than a decade. They're short. They're 5 minutes. And I was putting 2 out a month for a few months there, and then kind of had to set it down for a moment because I just got so overwhelmed with everything that's been going on with the pandemic. It was too much. So we took a little break, and now we put together some new bumper music. I know some of you didn't like that final sound at the end. I didn't really like it either. So we changed that, and I recorded a whole new batch, and I was amazed. I had forgotten about all these blog posts I had written, from 2009, and they were strangely relevant for right now. And I really enjoyed recording them. So we're revamping, and I posted one just a couple of days ago, and now they're going to come out every week. So this podcast, Yoga Talks, comes out on Monday. That's this full-length conversations I'm having. And then on Thursdays, I'm putting out Jay Brown Yoga Thoughts. It's a 5-minute quickie, and I do encourage you to subscribe to that. I'd be curious to know what any of y'all think of it. Now, before we get to the conversation today with Harish, let me mention today's sponsor, Karmasoft. Karmasoft has been supporting us longer than anybody. And if you are someone who is managing a studio or owning a studio or opening a studio, especially right now, I want to encourage you to check out Karmasoft for your studio management software needs. It's what I used when I had my yoga center in Brooklyn. I know the owner, Rudy Senecal. He's been on the show. Go listen to it. And I just think that he is working with people in a way to help them through this in ways that other companies are not. Let's just say that. So maybe now would be the time to check it out. Go to karmasoftonline.com. Also, this episode is brought to you in support by Podcast Premium subscribers like Carl Spicer and Bradley Wetzler. Thank you, Brad and Carl. We so appreciate you and all the rest of our subscribers. If you listen to the show on the regular and you want to have full access to the archives of this show and you just want to help support us, the best way to do that is to become a Podcast Premium subscriber. You get to choose your own rate. And if you are really strapped and you want to listen to some of the old episodes, just email us. We will give you a free account. But if you can afford to give something, it really makes a huge difference. And we're incredibly grateful. You can find out about becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber and all of my other stuff. The live stream classes, the weekly teacher's call, the Yoga of Business course for independent creators, the blog, the podcast, all my stuff. Everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I think we're going to just let that be it. As I mentioned, I've got some matters to attend to, so we're going to just keep this quick. I will touch base with you on the other side, but for now, let's go ahead and get to this conversation that I had with Harish Wallis. Hello?
Hello.
Harish.
Hey, how are ya?
I'm doing okay, all things considered. How are you?
Great. Yeah, beautiful day here. Beautiful late summer day in Portugal. Well, it still feels like late summer.
Wow, you made a place for yourself in Portugal. I saw that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Well, we can get to that. First, just hello. I really thank you so much for making some time for me. I've been following you pretty closely since you were on the show in August 2016. It's been that long.
And yeah, wow.
And honestly, there's so many different things that I had in mind that I would want to talk to you about. It actually was kind of hard for me to figure out what I should talk to you today about. But to sort of give us a little bit of a beginning frame, I thought that I would just share with you that, before the pandemic and everything shut down, I think that I had really, moved a little bit in a direction towards, I don't know what you would call it, like a very pragmatic presentation of yoga.
Yeah.
Where it's about functional movement and just like being well in life more than like trying to do big complex poses.
Mm-hmm.
But for myself personally, like practice has always been a much more, I don't know, in my mind, a kind of mystical thing, kind of a spiritual path,
Mm-hmm.
And with the shutdown and everything that's happened, it's actually had an interesting effect where I've been returning to all these things that I had shied away from.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, just chanting or like more poetry and more like emotional feeling involved in a way. I don't know how to say it. Or bhakti, maybe it's bhakti.
Yeah, totally.
And I think those were things that I found that like the market was kind of like frowning upon at one point. And I think I was trying to like meet the demands of the market or something.
Yeah.
And what I've realized in this time is that what I need most is that kind of more devotional space. And I see you as somebody who has always kind of had that kind of more bhakti element. I remember when you were on the show and we talked about your childhood and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
and even the difference between using the name Christopher and using the name Harish. Remember we talked about that? And I think that part of it has been that there was such a huge conversation around, cult dynamics in spiritual communities. And there were all these gurus who fell from grace, all these yoga masters who proved out to have abused people. And so I think that for me, part of the reason why there was a little bit of a move away from like bhakti elements is that's sort of seen as like a slippery slope. And so I'm real interested in finding that balance. Even just you said you opened a retreat center in Portugal. You opened a compound in Portugal. Are you starting? Are we starting a cult? I don't think so. But you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm interested to talk to you about that balance. That balance of having yoga practice have these devotional and other elements, I don't even know the right words to describe them, with and having even teacher-student relationships that are conducive to like spiritual development.
Yeah.
And yet still maintain, not falling into these like patterns. I just had a range of conversations of people doing these reckonings with, abuses of power.
Yeah.
I think many of us are trying to sort through that. Like, what do we do with all these yoga masters who did this stuff? And what does it mean in terms of our practice going forward? And do we all have to become somatic movers, or can we still chant?
Yeah. Well, I think it would be terribly unfortunate if somebody confused devotionalism in general with being part of a cult of personality. Those are very different things. I mean, they can overlap, but there's no specific reason to suppose that, one leads to another. I mean, there's complexity to this issue for sure, because one could say that somebody with devotional tendencies is more likely to be devotional towards their teacher or teachers, and thus more likely to get embroiled in a cult of personality. But this would seem like common sense advice, what I'm about to say, and yet it's not so common, I suppose, that you can feel a lot of love and devotion for your teachers without sort of pinning your life to theirs, like your finances or your life decisions, who should you marry or where should you move or whatever. Like that's something that's historically happened in India, on the basis of a guru disciple paradigm in which the guru would only have a few dozen real students, serious students, and he would know them or she would know them intimately, and therefore often actually have good advice on their life decisions, because if you just have a few dozen students, you know them all really well. And that's not the modern paradigm, but somehow like that idea that the teacher is somebody to consult about your life decisions or somebody to pin your life to in some way, that idea is still sort of around, and I think it is a detrimental idea. And there are plenty of people though that instinctively understand that you can have love and devotion towards someone that you feel has given you a lot in your life and for your life without sort of becoming karmically entangled, would be another way to say it, right? So I don't think, and devotionalism, of course, is something that most of which is not concerned with one's teachers, right? It's a devotional approach to life. Bhakti is related to the word bhajana, and bhajana in Sanskrit means reverence or reverencing. And it's an attitude that we can adopt towards life, one of reverence, reverence for the practice, for the practices, for the scriptures, for the opportunities in your life, for the gifts of challenge, for the gifts of obvious blessings as well as the disguised blessings we call challenges, and reverence towards the lineages that made these teachings and practices available, but also reverence towards nature, reverence towards love itself, towards aliveness, toward and this reverencing also can very much go hand in hand with a kind of poignant longing for the truth, longing for fulfillment, divine union, whatever, So these are two powerful aspects of the bhakti path, this practice of reverencing, or this attitude of reverencing, and then also acknowledging the sweet longing that we have for abiding in our true nature, or whether you call it divine union or something else. So that's the important part of this devotional aspect of the spiritual path, and none of that necessarily shades off into anything unsalutary, one might say, right?
Well, no, I don't think so. And that's where my question comes from. And it's exactly what you were saying, that I have felt this need to do this reverencing in a way that I haven't in the past. An example, like there's this one practice, this simple, like sort of side vinyasa movement that I've been doing. And for a while I was instructing it as like you're reaching for something on a top shelf. Like it was like this very functional kind of movement thing, just to keep it soft and easy, like not a stretch. And then more recently though, that has not been what I need. And what I've been doing instead is like hearing the sound of the wind through the trees, or envisioning that hawk I saw swooping through the air, like using imagery in ways that I never had. And it's because I need that. It fills me up in a way in the practice ritual that is vibrant and worthwhile. And that seems like something that I think I've associated that kind of reverencing with, like some of the, we all have to be careful that we're not getting taken in by abusive gurus. For some reason, like there's been a little bit of because there is a certain giving over or something, and you said you can be devotional to somebody without, giving your power over to them.
Yeah, well, I think here's the thing, is that when you feel this reverencing quality, when you feel this devotional quality, then you kind of feel, this is something like a heart opening. This is like a kind of more open-hearted state. And then there's this sort of natural fear that this open-hearted state could be dangerous vis-a-vis people who might, take advantage of your generosity, not just gurus, but, other humans in general. Mm-hmm. But that needn't be the case at all, right? Because the issue, the thing that puts you in danger with gurus or other humans is not open-heartedness, but lack of discernment. And for some reason, people conflate those very easily, but they're not the same. You can have this open-heartedness where you're open to receiving, and also that you're naturally giving, and that you feel this love or whatever. There's a flow of energy, but the lack of discernment is a whole different thing. It's like the assumption that for example, assuming a teacher embodies everything he teaches. Well, that's a lack of discernment to assume that, right? There's no reason to suspect somebody embodies everything they teach, because we often teach, as you must know, we teach what we're working on ourselves oftentimes, and we have insight into it, or we couldn't teach it. But we often teach that which we don't perfectly embody yet, but wish to. And so that lack of discernment is what puts us in danger. I don't think you have that, right? But I think you're rightly concerned about, more credulous folks out there who might be out there in your audience and who don't even realize they're more credulous. Of course, no one goes around thinking that they are credulous, right? But nonetheless, they might be if they don't realize the dangers of pedestalizing the teacher, for example.
Well, also, it does assume that someone comes to the teacher with the discernment already. And I guess they will need to if they're not going to be taken advantage of potentially. But I guess the other thing I'm seeing that I know that you wrote this not so long ago in a blog post of yours, and goes to the heart of one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, which was that you wrote that a corrupted person can still be a vehicle for like a healthy transmission. And that's like, it doesn't make sense to our brains. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at too, where there's this confusion of, well, there's things that I learned from somebody who I no longer feel I could fully support, let's say.
Right.
And then there's sort of a call sometimes out there, and maybe that's another conversation where it's almost as if because that person did these bad behaviors and hurt other people, maybe not you, that means that there's something corrupted about those teachings.
Right. But that's a wrong assumption, I would say, because the person is often just passing on what they've received, and the fact that the vehicle, right, the transmitter, is corrupted, if we're going to use that word, on his or her personality level or ethics level of their being, doesn't necessarily tell us anything about the value of the teachings themselves, which they're passing on. But maybe an even more useful way to frame this issue is to invoke the great philosopher William James, from his book Varieties of Religious Experience, which I recommend, by the way, to anyone interested in spiritual experience. He said, our principle should be fruits, not roots. Meaning to say, when we're looking at any given practice or even belief, we should ask, what are its fruits? What are its benefits? Is it efficacious? Is it life-enhancing and life-affirming and life-transforming? These are the questions that matter, not where did it come from? Because where it came from or where it seems to have come from, which are not the same, doesn't necessarily tell us anything about the potential efficacy of the practice. So I think for most people, practitioners, fruits not roots is a good principle to go by in general, right? Mm-hmm. But of course, if you're contemplating somehow entangling your life with that of a teacher, then you're going to want to examine their character. But in general, one shouldn't do that. Like there's a principle in the Indian tradition, actually, of don't live too far from your teacher, but also don't live too close. Like why would you entangle yourself in that way? Because people sometimes, and again, this is it's just a certain subset of the population, but they imagine that. They want to imagine teacher as savior. So we see this in the community around certain types of gurus like Amma or Sadguru, or, mostly Indian gurus, but also sometimes Westerners, where the teacher is viewed as a savior. And therefore there's this whole kind of surrender yourself to the guru sort of principle, which makes no sense and looks utterly mad to other people. But would make sense if it were possible that a teacher could be a savior. But I would argue they can't. They can only be an effective pointer or an ineffective one. But let's assume they're an effective pointer, a guide, a facilitator, and a pointer, and not in any way a savior. In fact, they can't even take one single step on the path for you, let alone bring you to enlightenment. And so if that's your clear discernment, then I think you also avoid quite a bit of trouble.
So is that what you just said, that a teacher can't just bestow it upon you in that way that we sometimes think of as a guru? Is that a distinction between a teacher and a guru, or do you even make a distinction? Like sometimes they talk about someone who, like people talk about Nareem Karoli Baba, like he comes to them in their dreams and tells them what to do. And then there's other people who are teachers who someone has more experience than someone else, let's say, but there's a more mutual exchange or something.
Yeah, it's not even about mutuality, right? It's about the presence or absence of this false savior paradigm, you know. Now, here's a point of possible confusion that you just kind of pointed out, which is that when somebody's very devoted to a guru, then what we call in my tradition, the Shakti, the spiritual energy, also known as Kundalini, can take the form of the object of your devotion in a vision or a dream. And that leads people to the wrong conclusion that, like Neem Karoli Baba or Amachi or whoever, some guru came to me in a dream, like as if they in their personality self, entered your dream.
They astrally projected into your dream world.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And there's agency there involved. And that's a wrong understanding, I would say. It's rather that the Shakti forms itself into the object of your devotion. It appears to you in that way because that's what's held centrally in your mind. And that's the same reason that, devotees of Christ have visions of Christ, and devotees of Krishna have visions of Krishna, and, not the other way around. But that's not proof. That's not actually proof that Jesus or Krishna, respectively, are the one and true only version of God. It's rather just that when the person is ready to receive some kind of, download, if you want to call it that, which is a real phenomenon, but it's likely to form itself into, again, the object of one's devotion. So that being said, right, that can lead us to wrongly conclude that there's some truth to the savior paradigm when I would argue that there isn't, that an actual teacher-student relationship, that's one where there is mutuality in terms of communication. Right.
I guess that's what I meant. That like, it isn't like I just bow at your feet and you tap my forehead and there's Shakti pot or something, that I can ask you a question more like I would ask of a friend in a way, even if there is I'm thinking of you with respect and not like my buddy, but like somebody I respect who has information that I don't have or experience that I don't have, but I can speak to you in a way that feels more like on a person to person level. There isn't like a hierarchy where I can't speak to you.
Yeah. In fact, I would like to invoke the phrase Kalyana Mitra, which often gets translated spiritual friend. Literally actually means beautiful friend, Kalyana Mitra. And that's a Sanskrit phrase. And, this is a much kind of healthier orientation that your teacher, even the phrase "my teacher" is already kind of too emotionally charged in a way, right? That your teacher can be like your spiritual friend.
And then maybe the reverse is true, like my students as well. Is that problematic when someone says my students, just like someone says my teacher?
Yeah, I think this emphasis, we can feel in discourse also this lean on the possessive pronoun, like my teacher can be said with a tone that makes it clear that it is equivalent to guru, even though they're avoiding the word guru, right? But also the possessiveness of it is, I think, problematic. I think it's problematic in all respects, because we also say my husband, my wife, my partner. It's this possessive, and in English we have no easy equivalent to that doesn't express possession, which itself is kind of disturbing,
Mm-hmm.
The way we incorporate the possessed person, the person that we see ourselves as possessing with the my, we incorporate them into our ego structure in some way, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if we also set ourselves up for a fall, as well as setting the teacher up for a fall, because, wanting to idealize the teacher, and then some disillusionment comes, and the disillusionment is painful in precise proportion to how much, the person was both idealizing and possessive of the teacher figure. And so I'm invoking this paradigm of spiritual friend, sort of walking the path, a few steps ahead of you, let's say, not in any hierarchical sense, but just in the sense that they have literally been practicing longer, have had insights you haven't yet had, or, can point out things you haven't yet seen, but without needing to kind of invoke a hierarchy in which they are higher, but just like the very simple thing we do with humans in general is like, oh, you've eaten at that restaurant. I haven't. Let me ask you what it's like. Oh, you've done these practices. You've walked this path. And I'm open to that, receiving support on that basis. And that would be enough. That would be enough to explain the whole paradigm of the teacher-student relationship, except that, of course, it's also possible that with certain teachers that they have not only walked the path longer than you, but it's also possible that they've shifted into a different paradigm of existence that we call awakeness, or, commonly known as enlightenment, but that's a very problematic word for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with understanding this is that it's not necessarily just a binary shift, where like suddenly somebody pops over into this other paradigm, because the other paradigm of existence has many kind of dimensions to it, just like normal human existence does. And the person might have woken up to certain aspects of that paradigm, but not all of them. And this is something that as soon as we start talking about this, people get a little nervous.
I just did. I was like, whoa, shift of, I like this phrase, a shifting of paradigm of existence. I'm curious because that did send off like a little bit of like a concern alarm, like, ooh, shifting, like that some people have accomplished this shift and other people haven't. Or what is this? How is it relative? Like, are there like different kind of, not levels, but like gradations of this shift? Or is it like now I've come into awakening and I can see my past lives, or not that I think it means that, but
no, yeah. There's many, many, many aspects to it, some of which might be realized and some of which might not be. But it's not that big of a deal. I'll try to describe it a little bit more so that we're clear.
It's not that big of a deal. I like that.
It really isn't. It isn't, because this paradigm shift, it's a possibility that exists within human consciousness, that exists within human physiology, I would even say. I have no argument with the neurologists who say, well, this is actually a neurological shift where the pattern of wiring in your brain has shifted, and the pattern of a kind of that the electrical currents trace out through your cortex, and that it's shifted in some way. Like, I'm not, of course, an expert in that area, but I'm just saying I have no argument with that perspective on it. That we don't need to understand it mystically. We can understand it as a kind of shift in neurological function that introduces us to a different paradigm of being. And I'll just speak, on the basis of my own experience, because I can't really speak authoritatively to aspects of it that I haven't experienced. But for me, it's a shift. And again, I don't claim it's complete in any way, but it was a shift from subject-object duality, where the world confronted me as something other. There's me and there's the world, and it's almost a sense of me versus the world. I gotta conquer, I gotta accomplish, I gotta achieve things in life, and I gotta avoid the bad things, and try to win this game and try to navigate this world of objects and people and dangers and so on. A shift out of that paradigm completely and into this other paradigm whereby there is no subject-object distinction, meaning to say, everything that I perceive is internal to consciousness, and therefore internal to what I am, because I experience myself as consciousness. So it's hard to describe, but it's almost as if everything shifted such that instead of seeing objects outside myself, everything I'm seeing is inside myself. And what I just thought before that I was just a mind and a body. And then I came to see that I was consciousness, and everything I perceive is internal to consciousness. So it's part of what I am. But there's no special priority to me, quote unquote, me, right? Because I understand that from everyone's point of view, they can see the same exact reality from their point of view, that everything is internal to consciousness from their point of view, right? So it's no specialness about me, right? Mm-hmm. It's just a perception of everything being not only internal to consciousness, but made of consciousness, had the result in my life of making me feel I'm at home wherever I am, and I can relax and truly go with the flow, not just in the sense of doing what I like, but in the sense of surrendering to the natural currents of life. And this profound feeling that there's nothing I need to run away from and nothing I need to chase after, because everything already is what I am. Which, when you put it in language, it can sound mystical, but it's really not very mystical. It's really just a different paradigm.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what I mean. Like, I often use the word mystical with a little hesitation, because there is sort of associations with that word, as though it's not just that it's a big deal rather than not a big deal. But I appreciate what you're talking about, because, it's sometimes difficult to talk about, and I would never use it as a word, enlightenment, because as you said, that word has a lot of associations around it. But there is sort of what you were just describing, this, I've often just for myself called it like okayness, like I'm totally okay regardless of all of it, Mm-hmm. Like there's like an underlying baseline feeling that I'm not, makes me, like you say, feel like I'm less subject to all of this turmoil or injustice or something. Like,
right, exactly. So that's part of this paradigm of awakeness, and you might have accessed that aspect, because again, like I said, there's a bunch of different aspects, and one of them is the sense of fundamental okayness that is not violated or undone by anything. So when you're in touch with that, you can have some challenge arise, you can have some shocking event happen in your life, and there's this level of our own being, our own consciousness, which feels this profound sense of everything is okay, even when it's not.
Yeah, I can be feeling really like emotionally sad, or like not feeling good at all, or not happy at all, but still have an underlying sense that I'm okay underneath it all, or something.
Yeah. And, I do want to kind of just signal that, there's a kind of issue that gets raised at this point in the conversation sometimes around privilege, like somebody saying, well, easy for you guys to say, a couple of well-off white guys or whatever.
I was just thinking that. I was like, it's easy for us to feel okay, isn't it? That's exactly what went to my mind, because that would be the pushback, right? Like,
and it's a perfectly valid pushback, except that the proposition here for people to check in their own direct experience is that what we're actually talking about is an aspect of consciousness itself, So everybody can access that. And in terms of like, people of less privilege, I often see it and experience it in older indigenous women, for example, that they have access in various cultures, India and South America and different places. I've seen the older indigenous women have access to this fundamental sense of okayness that enables them to weather kind of truly amazing storms in life, and they don't necessarily talk about it. It's like, perhaps that's really what's different in our demographic, is that we perhaps brag about having access to this that is actually just apparent to wisdom elders of indigenous traditions, and not something they need to even talk about.
That seems true, that a lot of times the people who have access to this most don't feel compelled to talk about it a lot. They just sort of are models or examples, and they rub off on you.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Exactly.
But I also think there's those of us, I think you, and I'm going to put me in the same boat, who are also whatever more like the intellectual consideration of these things as well. Find that stimulating. I think we might have even talked about that in terms of like scholar practitioner and how they feed off of each other last time you were here, if I recall. I guess my question now has to do with, the stuff that we're talking about, this shift of perspective or of existence, not of just perspective, of existence, you said, and the way that gets transmitted. You said earlier that like in the older days, they tended to be like teachers didn't have as many students around them. And there is a kind of thing in our modern cultures of like scale and things getting really big and standardized. And I've always been feeling like, well, that some of what's been happening now is kind of, since so much has been shut down, there has been like a return a little bit to like living rooms and basements and stuff. And I'm wondering, do you think that if it gets too big around a teacher, that inherent, like that becomes a problem, or that's when these kind of institutions get formed around somebody?
Yeah, it becomes a problem if the culture in an organization is overly focused on the teacher, and it needn't be. I try to encourage people to focus on the teachings rather than the teacher. Because really, there's nothing special about the teacher except his or her skill in pointing things out or explicating. Like their pedagogical skill matters, of course, but there's nothing else special about them, and even if there is, it's not salutary for the student to.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.